Okay, so I'm going to walk you through the directions on how to create a texture map and a bump map for Rubik's Cube. Understand this cube that we've created in Maya is a very simple cube. It doesn't have any beveled edges. Everything's straight up and down, which is fine because we're just learning how to assign texture maps and bump maps. So, step 1, create a polygon cube with dimensions of 10 units in width, height, and depth. We've done that already, but just as a review, we can go to Create, Polygon Primitives, Cube, Options, set the width, height, and depth to 10, divisions to 111, and hit Create. I'm not going to hit Create because I've already done that. Step 2, move it above the grid. It's already above the grid. It's floating in midair. It's still in the center of the world, except it's just up in Y. Number 3, create a blend material. Blend material because Rubik's Cubes are plastic. And assign the Rubik texture map to its color attribute. So I've already done that. You can see the blend here. To do that, you go to Create, Materials, Blend. Once you get your blend, you map it just like any other material. Go to the color, click on the little checker box. Now click on the file and go hunting for that texture. I've already done it, so I'm just going to close this out. Now step 4 is to plane or project the map onto 2 faces at a time using the same plane until all sides have been mapped. So if you look at our cube, like any other cube, we have 2 planes that are facing the Z direction, 2 planes that are facing the X direction, and 2 planes that are facing the Y direction. So to save time, we can assign a planar map, which will map our UVs at the same time, 2 planes at the same time. So I hit F11, select the front and back, go to UV, planar options, and project in Z for these. Project. You'll see the little manipulator pop up. If I really want to see what happened to my UVs, I go to my UV editor, and I'm going to zoom in here, and you can see the orange is what we currently have selected. The blue is what we have not mapped yet. It's the unfolded original cube UVs. So let's do that again to the side. I'm still in face selection mode. Control Shift to add the selection. UV, planar, options. This time we want to do it in X. And you'll see that the same thing occurred here in our UV editor. Now we want to do it in Y. Control Shift to add the top and bottom. UV, planar, options, in Y. Project. And now we have all of our UVs for all 6 faces of the cube together. They're all stacked on top of each other. So if I select UV by right-clicking, holding down the right mouse button, selecting UV, and drag select that UV, in my editor it looks like I have 1. If you look at your HUD, you have UVs of 6, a total of 24. That's because we have 6 sides. Each side has 4 UVs, so 6 times 4 is 24. And you can see that when I select it in the 2D UV editor, it actually selects in 3D the actual UV on the cube. So now we're going to assign our material to our cube all at the same time. So I'm going to go back into object mode by clicking on or hitting F8 on my keyboard. Select my cube, right click on the material and go assign material to selection. Initially you won't see anything happen. That's because we're still in smooth shade mode. In order to see textures, we have to hit 6 on our keyboard or click on the checkered sphere up here at the top of our view. So if I hit 6, you should see the texture map for all 6 of our faces line up perfectly on each face. UV editor, this is Y. So I have my UVs surrounding the single texture map that I brought in and that I created in Photoshop. Now I have my image range, I've adjusted it, so when I look at my UV editor I see a boatload of repeated textures. This helps because you can move those UVs out of the original placement zone in order to avoid overlap and in order to make it easier to select UVs when you need them. So to do that, you go to Image, Image Range, Options. I currently have my settings here, -5, -5, 10, 10, with a preset of none. And that, again, makes it easier to manipulate UVs. If we follow our directions, we go to number 6, which says go to the UV editor and select all of the UVs. They should be coplanar. We talked about that already. They're all right on top of each other. So go to the UV editor and select all UVs. To do that, again, I'm going to right click and I'm going to drag, select all of them. The directions say scale them down to fit one color. Note the orange is in the center, so it's easier if we scale them down to the orange one. I'm going to hit R to get my scale manipulator, and I'm going to click on the middle and drag left. Now as you see, my UVs are scaling down. You can also see in real time the cube and what's happening to each face as I scale this down. We want to leave the edges in a black portion of our texture because we want all of our borders throughout to match up, and if they're all in black, it's going to look or appear to be seamless. So we want to leave a little border around the outside of our texture. So now if we go back to our directions, the next one says select one face at a time and move the UVs in the UV editor to different colors. Note, you do not always have to select UVs to move the faces in the UV editor. What that means is I can now go into F11 face selection mode on my actual cube, and in my UV editor it already has those UVs selected, so I can move it from the middle and move it over to another color. So I'm going to move this one up to blue, and I'm going to move this one. I selected another face to green. Actually, I should try to keep it on the same plane. So I'm going to grab the X handle and move it. Now I'm going to go to the other side, grab that one, move it over on top of the one I just did and straight down using the Y manipulator, again leaving a little margin around the outside. And I'm not being too perfect with this. Just get it close, it's fine at this point. This one I can move straight down to the white, and we can't forget our bottom face, which I'm going to move straight down to the white, but then over to the yellow. And once we've done that, we have this whole cube mapped with a different color, and we did it very quickly because we did a lot of the work at the same time. Now back in the directions, I'm sort of going to jump up. Rather than adding the bump map first, I'm going to import the light rig. So I'm going to do 10 instead of 9 so I can do a render and show you an example. So I'm actually going to do like 10, 11, and 12, and then go back and add the bump map so you can see what happens to an object when you add a bump map to it. So I'm going to import the light rig by going to File, Import, and you need to navigate to wherever you downloaded the Rubik's light rig to Students, Import. And you'll see in my scene I've got these 4 lights surrounding it. This is a real basic lighting setup, and it's going to be pretty boring and plain, but either way it brings light in so that I can do a render. The next thing I'm going to do is go back to my directions, add the render view button, which is Windows, Rendering Editors, Render View, to your custom shelf and launch it. So Windows, Rendering Editor, Render View. Hold down Control Shift and click on it, and it'll add it to your window, or excuse me, to your shelf, my custom shelf. I have it here. And now the next one says launch it, render by hitting this button in your Render View window. So if I launch it and I hit my render button up in the top left underneath File, you should see a render of my cube. Now this is sort of a deal in Maya that I'm not a big fan of, but there's this sRGB gamma thing up here that says on. To get a true view of the colors and what it looks like on a real render, I choose off on that, and now you get a good idea of what that render looks like. And I'm going to save this by clicking this little image icon here. It says keep image. I can save it in here. So the next render I can do, I can go back and forth with the slider and compare one to the other. So at this point, we really want to add our Rubik's texture bump map to our cube. So I'm going to go back into my Hypershade, click on my blend, and down here you'll see where it says bump normal mapping. And you map this just the same way you did the color by clicking on the little checkerboard, going to File, and I'm going to change the bump value by clicking on that. I get my folder. And now I've got to take a second to navigate to where I have that image stored. I'll be there in a second. Maya 2, Rubik's Cube, Rubik texture bump map. Oh, not that one. No face. There we go. We're going to do the face later. Open. And now you can even see it happen. If I were to make these a little bit larger, you can see I've got a bump map on there. We don't have to assign this to the cube because we already have the material assigned to the cube. All I've got to do is check my render. And you can see that it's got the illusion that there is a texture or a bump on it. So if I go back and forth between these two from the original without bump and the new one with bump, you can definitely see a difference. Now the last step on this is experimenting with the bump map. And you do that by altering the texture. So if I go to my directions, which says experiment, blah, 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 and then do another render, well, I'm going to go back here. I'm going to save this render as well. Now I'm going to go to my bump map. And I'm going to do something very simple. I'm just going to get a brush, and I'm going to choose a brush that has some weird stuff on it, like a chalk brush. And I'm going to make it pretty big. And I'm going to do it in a new layer. I'm going to paint over the top, and I'm going to choose like this little middle sort of gray. Now I'm just going to click around on my white, and then I'm going to save as, make sure I'm in the same place, and I'm just going to call this 77777. Oh, I got to flatten first. Flatten my image. Always flatten your image. Flatten image. Save as. I'm just going to put a bunch of 7s on this so I know which one it is. Save. Okay, go back to Maya. Go back to your hypershade. Click on the blend. Go back to the bump map and remap this to the new texture. 777. Open. Now you can actually see it in real time what happened, but if I do a render, again, render view, render, you'll see that I have all this stuff on it, this extra bump mapping. The last thing that I'm going to do is a little bit of a more advanced move, but I look at my Rubik's Cube and I don't like the depth of the bump. I think there's too much there. It looks like a dog got a hold of it and chewed it up. So I'm going to go back to my hypershade, click on my blend, or excuse me, click on the tab to the right of textures called Utilities. In Utilities, I've got this bump 2D1. If I click on that, you'll see in the property editor our bump value, which we have mapped with that bump map, and our bump depth. And if you take that bump depth down, you can see it in real time. The depth goes to a smaller number. I'm going to bump it down to, I don't know, 226. And then I'm going to go back to my render view, and I'm going to save this again by clicking this icon, and I'm going to re-render to look at it. Now I've got something that I like a little bit better. It's not so dramatic of a depth. And finally, I want you to save your final render by going to your render view, file, save image. You can save it as a JPEG. It's fine. Make sure you navigate to where you want to save it to. Save it, and then make sure you name it properly, as usual, the naming convention. Save it, submit it to Google Classroom. You can also have fun with playing again with that texture map. If I go to my materials and I remap my bump, I did one before where I have these faces on it. There's like stormtroopers. I'm going to open that. You can see them on there. If I do a render, it should have this little bump map stormtroopers on there, which can be fun. So that's it for this tutorial. Hopefully you understand what a bump map does and how to manipulate it and alter it, how to apply textures to different faces at the same time. In this case, in order to create a Rubik's Cube.